Hi, everyone. Good evening and welcome to another family meeting. Tonight, we have a special guest and we are talking about tantrums. And I know that's a very popular topic. Cheng, if you hear me, your mic is off just to turn it on so we can chat. Perfect. Hi, Cheng.
Hello, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited to have you on because I had you on as a collaborator a couple weeks ago now on Instagram, and it was a really popular week. I think we all want to chat about tantrums and find out how to help our child and ourselves too. We're going to wait maybe a minute or two as people slowly trickle in. It's the day after daylight savings time, so we might lose a few a few parents today. Hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, Casey and Catherine, Danielle. Welcome again to another family meeting. So yeah, let's talk for one quick minute about daylight savings time. I don't know. I tried something new this year or this season, and I skipped naps with both my kids all week last week to get them super tired for the weekend. And I've had zero issue. They fell asleep right on time last night because they must have been tired. And nap times went well today. Everything's sort of on track. I don't know if it's some sort of trick, but it worked.
Good to know.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody else here is having trouble with bedtimes or, wow, you're brave. Yeah, last week was rough. I would say by Thursday, Friday, behavior was crazy in this house. And even on Saturday, Sunday, they took a small nap on Saturday. But besides that, they were happy to stay awake. My 3 and 5-year-old, sorry, I was about to sneeze. My 3 and 5-year-old, they don't want to nap anyway. So I figured, what's the point of kind of fighting it off? I'm just going to keep them awake for the week. And they wanted to, they were happy. They would fall asleep earlier and then were awake a little earlier, which I didn't mind. But yeah, it worked out well. Okay, so now we have a few people on board. Let's get talking about tantrums. You guys know how it works. We're gonna chit chat, and if there's any questions you want to ask, you can ask privately or you can ask by posting it so that everybody sees. And you can also join in. If you turn on your mic, we can hear you. Or if you want to turn on your camera, feel free. It's up to you. Okay, let's start off with the basics. What is a tantrum?
Yeah, I consider tantrum any kind of disruptive behaviors that's just a big emotion. So you start to see it, 18 months, around 2 years of age, it just kind of flares up and it's just all of a sudden you have strong reactions to things. Often it comes with triggers like they don't get their way or they're really tired. Something like that really incites some of those emotions.
And I just realized we didn't give you your background. I know you, and I just thought everybody knew you in my head. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now in your work and your research?
Yeah, so my name is Chen, and you might know me on Instagram as Parenting the Unexpected, and I am a clinical psychology resident right now. So I am finishing up the very last few months of my doctorate degree in clinical psychology, and I have this interest specifically in kids often with neurodevelopmental disabilities, but also in just supporting parents and being able to navigate all the ups and downs of this grand adventure.
It really is a grand adventure. Okay, so now I think I'm glad that you gave us that definition because sometimes we interpret any kind of big emotion as a tantrum, but it's not, a 10-month-old who is lashing out or a young baby who's disappointed with something and just screams and cries. That's not necessarily a tantrum yet at that point, right?
Right. And I think a lot of it I think it adds in the cognitive piece, I think, is a tantrum of like, this is not what I want. Versus, I think when they're especially younger, a lot of the crying is just because there's something that doesn't feel good in their body. There's something that they need, and they don't really have the language to express that. And so it comes out in cries. But hopefully, in most normally developing kids around, the twos, we're starting to get some words and we're starting to get more cognition developing. And so hopefully we see some of that, and the tantrums come along just right along there because they're developing right on track.
and with the parents that I've spoken with so far through Curious Neuron, I think sometimes we have this sort of feeling of like, I did something wrong, or why is my child acting this way? Or, how during my past couple of years of parenting, like, where did I go wrong in this? And it's not that. And I'm glad that you're bringing all this up because it's part of their development.
Yep, it is very, I think, normal to see that. I think it's easy to like, especially on social media and other platforms, to see these well-behaved kids and strategies that seems to work miracles, and videos of like, if you do this, then this will happen. But in real life, I think for most of our kids, all of our kids, I think at some point or another, you're going to get big emotions in some way or another. Some kids externalize, right? So they have their fists going everywhere, kicking behaviors or yelling. Some kids internalize, so you see the anxiety coming in. They might get sad, they might cry. These are all just ways of them navigating their big internal world and really trying to make sense of it.
I think maybe as a parent, the hardest part of these tantrums is not when you're in your home, or it might be if they're having a few a day, but it's when you're outside too, right? Because if they're externalizing these behaviors, and I mean, I've experienced it within my family, and feel free everybody to share if you've experienced this too, but your child has a big emotion around something, and it's usually around transitions or something is ending, right? Leaving outside to come back inside. I mean, it sucks. They don't want to, they're having fun playing. So those are the times where you have to really be careful and use your words properly and use certain strategies. And then even a family member, I don't know if it's every single mom or mother-in-law or even grandma that feels like we've never had tantrums. They never experienced this. This is something new of our generation. I don't know if anybody has heard this from their family, but I think because of these sort of this sort of language around it, when with your family or friends or people judging you or you feel like they are, we put this whole negative thing around tantrums, thinking that it's bad and then it looks bad on us. But in the end, it's just a teaching moment. It's a moment that your child is saying, like, I'm filled with these emotions. What do I do with this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what can a parent do in the moment, in the heat of the moment, when a child is having a tantrum? What's the best thing that they can do?
I always say respond with a deep breath. That's the best place to start, because that's where we also want our kids to start, right? It's just being able to, no matter what emotions going through them, is being able to kind of like center ourselves and ground ourselves, so that we can access, I think, our more, innermost wisdom or better judgment in that moment. And so no matter if you are, it's easy, I think, especially if you're outside, especially if you feel like, people are watching or judging in the moment, to get into a frantic mode. And I know I don't think well when I'm frantic. When I'm swimming, most people don't. And so really being able to just take that step back and take that breath is really helpful. I think really knowing, I always say parents are the experts in their child, and I think tapping into that expertise and being able to develop, I think, understanding of when these tantrums might happen. So if you're noticing it's at the grocery store, or noticing when it's coming back inside, or transitioning from one thing to the other, or around bedtimes, I think really pausing when you are calm, to kind of working through a plan to kind of confront those moments.
I like
and
that.
I think working through those things as a parent also mirrors what we hope for the kids, right? Which is when they are calm, we're also teaching them the strategies to confront those moments. So kind of mirroring that as well.
I like that you're mentioning the in-between tantrums. That's something I'll speak to parents to mention with parents, because you're not going to teach anything new during a tantrum. The same way that with us as adults, if we're losing our minds about something, don't give me a lesson. Don't tell me to calm down. It's and I think the same applies with our kids. In that moment, there's not much we can do but regulate ourselves and be there for them. And something that I'd like to bring up also, it's not a moment to discipline unless there was something maybe bigger, hitting or something more aggressive, perhaps address it, but a tantrum isn't a reason to discipline. And what would you do? Let's say the tantrum is mixed with hitting or scratching, or with younger kids who might not have the words yet. How can we address that sort of tantrum mixed in with that behavior?
Yeah, I think when I think about any tantrum behaviors, my recommendations often comes into two groups. One is for the kids who are just developing. This is something new. They're really trying to figure something out. Maybe they hit you once and got your attention, and now it's like a way of them expressing themselves. This is something really new. And then there are kids who just have more disruptive behaviors. And speaking for the first group, let's say if there was a lot of the hitting, or let's say scratching, hair pulling is very common. I think it's really about teaching, right? It's about they want something and they're getting it through the hair pulling. They need your attention. They need you to know that, hey, I'm not feeling good, or I want something else. This is not okay. They grab your hair, and all of a sudden they kind of get your attention, or they get something that they want. And so really teaching them to pull away, say gentle hands, really recognizing what they want, to being able to kind of validate the emotion that they have, and then provide some guidance around that. So for, I think, the kids who are just starting out, really teaching those skills. But with the kids that I think have developed a habit of doing so, I would add an extra layer, which is I would often add in maybe extra ignoring. For example, you don't want to give attention, you want to turn it away. That doesn't mean being a cold and cruel mom. It means just in that moment, not giving them what they want, so it's not rewarding. And then the second that they're able to put down their hands, or you're holding their hands nicely, then you can turn to them and give them what they want. Of like, I love that you're using gentle hands. Thank you for not hitting. And so that the reward is directly connected with the behavior that you like, rather than with the hair pulling or the tantrums itself. So I would add that extra layer in if it's more of a bigger pattern that you're starting to see develop.
That's really good. It's important, I think, that we're, like you said, sometimes we don't really realize, but we're giving in, or we're giving them what they want, or even the response that they're looking for when they're hitting us, or they're hurting us. And I like the fact that you have to wait for that moment where things kind of calm down, and ignoring them. But I think I had heard this with people for tantrums. So we're not ignoring the tantrum, we're ignoring the negative behavior. Got it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
The tantrum, though, that we give attention to.
Yep. And I always say there's a moment that that things get better. So some parents say, my kid can just cry. They just cry, or if you let them cry, they'll cry for 5-10 minutes. When am I supposed to like interject and praise them if I'm supposed to ignore? And I always say, even in between those cries, they have to gasp for breath. And in between those, the breath part is when they're quiet, and you can turn in those microseconds and say, I love that you're not crying right now. I love that you're calming down. So I can learn a little bit about what you would like, and rewarding that, so they know, like, when I take that deep breath, when I am calm, mama's going to listen to me, and being able to hear a little bit more of my need and respond to it. So really thinking about when we show that love and that reward through our love, what we're connecting it to, I think will really help, shape up some behaviors.
And thinking back to one of my kids, when that sort of happened and they were crying, and you're right, there's a breath. And when you talk in between, all of a sudden the space between the next cry, there's more space, because you can see that they're listening to you. So they realize that when they cry, they can't hear you. And then I like that. It's true. I never even made the connection. I love that. We hear a lot from the OT community, the occupational therapists, about sensory sensitivities. And I just wanted to, if you want, just touch upon that if possible, because sometimes we do notice a change in behavior and elevation, like increased tantrums, when there is a sort of heightened sensory environment, more sounds, something louder, sometimes a new baby in the environment, them coming back from daycare and so on. Is there a link between that sort of environment and more tantrums?
I think if any of us feel overwhelmed or feel uncomfortable, we're all going to feel irritable, and we're all going to feel more on edge. And it's only, it takes a little thing to kind of push us over the edge. And I think of that as for kids as well. So helping problem solve around it, helping, really thinking about how do we alleviate some of the discomfort is really helpful, whether it's sound or textures or other aspects of sensory.
What is the link? So I only know the neurological aspect. I know that part of our brain that it's involved in sensations is connected to the amygdala, which is part of our emotions. But out of that, psychologically, what's the link between senses and let's say emotion regulation, like calming ourselves down? Why do we all often hear about touching things and working with the senses to calm down?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've ever dug into the research literature
Um,
from that, but
maybe
from
we
a
maybe we can do that for some sort of article together, which by the
yeah.
way, I could send the link as well, but she has an article on her website now which summarizes a lot of what we're talking about and more, so you can head on to the curiousneuron.com. It's on the front page, and yeah, for those of you who want to read more. And thank you. And yeah, I was curious to ask you that because it's something that I keep questioning and I never have time to dive into the literature. I know so it's the thalamus and the amygdala. But
Yeah.
then I know that anybody in the community or most people in the parenting community, we often talk about, these calming corners and these blankets, these soft blankets or stuffed animals. And we talk about visualization too, and thinking of,
Yeah.
implementing all the senses, but I've never really looked into the literature. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, from some research that I know in the clinical perspective, a lot of the calming things, right, the coping box, calming corners, etc. A lot of that comes from grounding, just as a principle of grounding yourself in the moment. So let's think anxious kid. So anxious kid is there, and all of a sudden she's a little bit scared of separating from you, and you're gonna leave, and all of a sudden she's crying. In her head, it may be things like, oh, what's going to happen to mommy? Am I going to be okay? This feels really dangerous. But any anxiety thought, for example, is thoughts about the future. It's not a fear of the imminent, it is a fear of the future. And so then you're stuck in thinking about all the what ifs. But when you are brought back to the moment and you're able to take a deep breath, you're able to smell some good scents, feel the moment, feel the textures, let's say, of the chair that I'm sitting in right now.
Yeah.
It brings us down to the moment so that we can be able to kind of calm down our bodies to the here and now. From a clinical perspective, this is why we advise a lot of the coping skills that we do is to bring them down to the moment, to ground them. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. That part makes sense now. And now I'd love to touch a little bit on maybe a few little strategies. I think we've touched some, but maybe if there's anything else that we can offer parents and guys and everybody who's here, if you are experiencing tantrums in your home right now with your child, and there's some question that you'd like to ask her to help you out, or a situation that you're stuck in, like she said, it's really important to kind of understand where they're coming from and what's triggering them. I often talk about becoming the tantrum detective, because then that way, if you're writing it down, you could say, okay, you can kind of create these categories and say, okay, I see them happening more when there's a transition or there's a language issue around it. I need to teach them because if they're young, they might not have the language to express themselves. So you work on certain words. So there are ways to do it. So if you let us know what you need help with regards to tantrums, we can help you out. Do you have any, I'm trying to think back to the week where we collaborated. I think you had some other strategies that you offered parents.
Yeah. I can't remember what I wrote in the post, but I can tell you clinically some of the things that we often talk with parents. I think a lot of it comes down to planning ahead of time, like I shared then. So I think really being able to think about, okay, what kind of things lead to the tantrum. I love that you called it the tantrum detective, because I think essentially that's what we do, whether you're in seeing a psychologist or you're at home puzzling about it yourself at night. What kind of things are kind of triggering these behaviors? Because behind each behavior, there's a need. And the need could be as simple as, I just want mama's attention, because each kid does want mom's attention, right? It is the most rewarding thing that we feel. We feel loved, we feel warm, we feel secure. And that is all great and necessary for development, and sometimes they don't feel like they get enough of it. So it could be that basic to something like, I'm really anxious about this, or I didn't get my way and I want my way. So there's a lot of things there, and then planning ahead of time to kind of mitigate it. I think prevention is always the best strategy. And then I think role playing through it. I think thinking about, okay, if in this situation, what can we do to feel better? So if I'm feeling really overwhelmed in the moment, especially for a slightly older kid who's still tantruming, what can we do ahead of time? So having a plan, having your child walk you through that plan, you can practice like, oh, mommy's really upset. I think I'm just gonna be cry. And then have them be like, okay, mommy, take a deep breath. And you can kind of practice that and really trying to build around those skills, because even if we have a plan, when we're in that fight or flight mode, right, of like, this is too much, I'm overwhelmed, you're not going to remember that plan unless it's ingrained in your head or like someone's taking it in front of you. And so usually we got to ingrain it through a lot more practice just so they know what they're supposed to do. So I would do that. I often suggest, again, really just having whatever you decide in your family is appropriate as your consequence, still having a consequence. Just because it's developmentally appropriate doesn't mean that the behavior is appropriate. So we don't want it to keep growing, right? It's something they're learning through, and they're learning that there are limits, right? They can have these big feelings. It is okay to not be happy with this. And also hitting when you're not feeling good about it is not okay. And so they're learning kind of those boundaries. And when you respond consistently, when you respond immediately, they're able to connect those dots so that they know, oh, this is okay, but this other thing is not okay, and kind of learn to navigate that.
I like that last part of contrasting, this is okay, but this is not okay, because we often get stuck in this sort of cycle of don't do that. This is not allowed. Don't do this. Don't hit. Don't scream. Don't yell. And then, as a child, there was something I read. I forget if it was part of a book or an article, but they had asked the child like, oh, what are you allowed to do in daycare? And they're like, I don't know, but I know that I can't do this and I can't do that. And I can't. So they remembered all the rules, but then they couldn't really put words to what they were allowed to do when, there's so much more that you're allowed to do. So same thing applies within our home. When you contrast it, something becomes a little bit more clear for a child. And it's like, okay, I can, it's not wrong to get upset, and it's not wrong to be frustrated or disappointed, but there's a right way and a wrong way to kind of do, or a better way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think contrast is the other thing that's like the secret ingredient to make consequences work. For example, some families who practice timeouts, they say it doesn't work. And I'm like, have you ever tried time ins? Because then you need like a contrast. Or if you are responding in a more calm way to tantrums, can you bring your enthusiasm and really contrast your reaction to when they're doing gentle hands or doing something else that you like? Because your contrast as well in reacting to it really helps them just understand what is appropriate or not.
Yeah, I love that. We have a question here. So my son throws toys a lot. He loves balls. We are okay with throwing balls, but is there a way to teach him the difference in being able to throw a ball, but not a hard block? How old is your son? Just so that we know, Casey, I can't remember. 18 months. That's a tough age. Sorry?
Yeah, it is a tough age. No, I completely agree. There's a lot of things going on in terms of development, figuring things out, and it's super exciting because they're all like moving and all over the place. And throwing really does happen, whether it's throwing a ball or throwing the cup or throwing something else. I think I love that we're thinking about this in nuance, in terms of it's not just not okay to throw or okay to throw, but there are things that are good to throw and not good to throw. And so I think a lot of it just comes with practice. So it's harder to help at this age. It's hard for them to cognitively be able to say like, this is hard, this is soft. You can throw this soft thing, but you can't throw this hard thing. I think that's beyond their developmental level. But having like let's say like a basket or a bin of things that they are allowed to throw, and a place where they're allowed to throw. So it's not just throwing it anywhere in the house, but a specific direction, and practicing with that. Like you can have fun throwing it together and then praising, I love that you're able to throw it into the bin. I love that you're throwing it into this corner. Whatever that may be really helps them understand what they can throw. And then once you're able to understand that, you can add a little bit to it, but I would at least start there.
And I think back to the role play that you mentioned with my son. So he's 21 months now, and there was a lot of throwing going on with him. And now I've seen a bit of a decrease, because we'll do a bit of a a game, like when we're just playing, I'll take something and I'll say this, let's say my phone or a cup or whatever it is, and I'll say this, no, 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 we don't want to throw it, we want to place it. And I use like some placing down as like an exaggerated thing, but I'll take different toys and take them and say, should I throw? No, no, no throwing. We're going to place it. And then it becomes part of just a conversation or a game that you're doing with them. And he would go around and place things down. I emphasize the placing it gently on the floor. So that he could at least understand, like, we don't throw things. Because, even if he was giving me back my phone or giving me back like a cup of water, everything was being thrown. It was like really intense around 18 months. So I think once we kind of incorporated the exaggeration of placing things down rather than throwing them, he kind of got it now. Now we're safe. We're in the safe zone.
From I love that. I love that you kind of demonstrated that behavior, made it into a game, had a lot of practice around it. It was just full of fun rather than like discipline and like, don't do this. Yeah. That's beautiful.
It's because it's like you mentioned before, there's a lot of the in-between work and the role play, and we can teach them those skills, but not when it's happening. When it's happening, we say the yes or no, but then in between we could do a lot regarding that sort of skill that we want to teach them. What would you recommend for kids 7 to 11 years old if they cry when asked to put the devices down and always demand more time to play video games? They get overstimulated and it's hard for them to calm down when devices are taken away. That's a big one, right? With the devices.
Yeah. And I think with COVID, it is so hard because, they're always at home. There's limited options of what we can do. For a lot of us, it's winter. You can't really send them outside. So I think screen time is a huge thing that a lot of parents are facing. And I think it really goes to, I think the hard thing about screens is that you introduce it and suddenly the boundaries around like when is it appropriate, how much and what sometimes is easily blurred because it's so convenient. And there's so I think when it seems to be too much, I would just pause for a moment and ask yourself as a parent, what are you comfortable with? So whether that be time of day, right, eliminating it in the evenings for sleep hygiene purposes or other things, or how much time can they have a day, what apps, thinking about all that for yourself so you know where you stand first. And then I would, when kids are not on their screens, when it's a calm time, I would kind of tell them about it. If they're at this age, they're developmentally able to understand. And then I would put those boundaries in place. So, for example, whether that's having a timer, so that visually they know when it's going to end, or have some other cues for them to know that. There's this thing called an extinction bubble. Cindy, I know we talked about it a little bit before, but often when parents start, especially at these ages, to put in a new rule, kids are like, I don't like this. I didn't buy into this. I don't want this. Nobody asked me my opinion. I want to say no.
I just had a flashback of myself as a teenager, and those are not fun.
They're like, Mom, I don't agree with what you're doing, so no. And so because they're going to say no, they're going to push a little bit harder. So they're going to cry a little bit harder, like, this is unfair, this is too much. And they're going to see how much they can push, because they're still learning the limits of this world, limits of how things work. They're going to push really hard, even harder than before, to see where they can get. So for example, if they usually cry 5 minutes, they're going to be like, let me try 7 minutes, see if Mom buys that. And then 9, and then 11. And then at some point, some kids are going to learn, you know what, no matter how much I cry, Mom's not going to give me more screens, because our deal was 5 minutes, or whatever that time period is. Now, the problem is sometimes when they're getting to the 7s and 9s, 11s and more, you're like, how long is this going to last? I need to go out the door. I need to get grocery. Life needs to go on. And then we hand them the screen. And I always pause parents there, and I'm like, what did our kid just learn? Our kid learned that 5 minutes of crying is not enough. 11 minutes is the perfect time to cry, because if I cry for double the time plus a little bit more, my mom's going to give me the screen. And so then the next time, they know they at least have to push to 11, and then they're going to push to 15 and 20, and we got longer tantrums. So I say, if you're going to give up, if you're going to give in to your kids, give in at the 1 minute mark, the 5 minute mark. You can deal with that. Don't give in after you held out for a more extended amount of time. But I'm sharing this because I I often like to remind parents that it always gets worse before it gets better. So just because you implemented a new rule, a new boundary, and they're pushing back doesn't, and it seems more chaotic, doesn't mean you did a poor job. It just means that they are learning how hard your boundary is, and that is okay because there's so many boundaries out there in the world. They're about to learn about it sometime, and it's better that they learn with you through this way. And so it's okay. So going back to just succinctly what my answers would be about devices. One would just be really thinking about what your rules are. Two, presenting it to them really when they are calm. And then three, holding firm to it. And then doing other things to help. You can do other things to help with those transitions, like giving them a heads up, you know, putting like a visual timer there, being able to put like if then clauses, other things around it. But I would really hold true to those first three things as you implement the new rule.
I really like that. I think also having some sort of, I don't know if you have it already in your home, but a sort of schedule. So you mentioned at the beginning, maybe a schedule of saying certain times are for, you know, games and screen time, or a timer. And it goes back to also what you said about tantrums, where you're trying to prevent before it happens. So you're saying, okay, yes, you know, it's 6 p.m. We just finished dinner. You can play your video games, but at 7 o'clock, that's done, you know, it's over. I don't want, you know, and you stick to that boundaries. I like that sort of you're setting yourself up for it. And we do, regardless of our child's age, really sticking to that boundary is so hard, but so important at the same time. And I get it, because if you're at the end of your day and you're like, yeah, well, if they just play a little bit longer, I get a bit more time to do a few things around the house or do whatever. And you don't realize that it's going to keep adding up in the end, especially with screen time. Yeah.
Definitely.
I love that question. Okay, so again, if you have any questions regarding tantrums, let us know. My last question to you is something that we addressed, and I think it's an important one, because a lot of times parents with young kids will say, are these tantrums normal? They're happening X amount of times a day. My child can't snap out of it no matter what I do. So at what point, you know, does a parent, or what should a parent look for within their child's tantrums to say, perhaps I need to speak to their pediatrician about this?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to just, if you had one word in mind, would just be impairment. How much is it impacting negatively your daily lives or the daily lives at school, right? For kids who are attending school. If it's starting to impact your daily lives, then I think it's time to talk, because tantrums come and go. And usually they're tolerable, right? We know that we kind of have a sense of they're going to happen and they last for a couple minutes. But if you're there sitting there and it's 15, 30 minutes, it's an hour, they're still moody, things aren't going on, there's a lot of hitting, you find yourself avoiding your child in moments because you don't want to get hit. You're noticing that family system is kind of getting a little bit, changing as a result of it. I think broadly that is when I say, like, okay, it never hurts to go in for even just like a consultation, and getting some support around it. Just because you see, I think in Hollywood or in other aspects of media, you see therapy being painted at this like extensive, long thing that you commit to. But I think especially when it comes to child behavior, and if you are looking for someone with more, I think, specialty in behavioralism to treat, it can be really short. It's sometimes just going in, sometimes you're in the middle of it and you can't figure out what these tantrums are about. And it's helpful to go to a professional and be like, hey, I noticed these things. They can kind of pull it apart for you. They can kind of create a plan for you. And then within a few sessions, you feel like you have a really good kind of concept of how to approach it. Sometimes having one or two support sessions like that, consultation sessions, is just very helpful. So if you're noticing it's really impairing things about life, it's really changing home life, I think it's time to talk to someone.
Thank you for addressing that part of what the therapist would do, because maybe that's something that scares us as a parent. We might say, okay, I am noticing that the functioning of this home has changed, or that something it has changed in my child. They're more frequent, or they're more aggressive. But there might be that fear on our end as a parent saying, I don't want my child to see a psychologist, or a spouse, or, saying there's no way that my child is going to see a psychologist. They're fine. This is part of development, So understanding that the therapist does, from what you just said, the therapist works with the parent, not directly with the child, or do they a little bit? Okay.
So I think child therapy usually goes into two groups. One really focuses, with the more play therapy, and it's a lot more child directed. There's a lot of benefits to play therapy. Often, if we're talking tantrums, it is, in my personal opinion, and also I think a lot of the research supports this, having someone be able to address them in a more behavioral way is often more helpful. And those more behavioral strategies really are shorter kind of appointments that are really tailored when they're younger aged with the parents. So I would even say like 8 to 10 years and younger. It's mostly parent work that I do, really helping them learn. When I do bring in the kids into the therapy room, it's actually to coach the parents, coach the kids. So like we'll play a little bit, and then it's cleanup time, and then the kids are like, nope, not going home. This Mr. Potato Head is just really fun. Then I get a perfect moment to be like, okay, so what tools do we use here? As they're dropping and flopping on the hospital grounds. Let's go. And so then it kind of really helps, parents really understand by actually practicing some of these skills we're talking about in the moment. Yeah.
The part of cleaning up the toys, it's just whenever I look at these studies, even like the research articles, right, and they talk about monitoring the interaction between a parent and the child, they'll mention like such a short bout of play, 5 minutes of play for these studies, and then it's just cleanup time. And
Yep.
I always wondered like why at the beginning, when I was reading these, I was like, why are they making them clean up? And then I didn't have kids at that point. And then I had kids and I was like, that's why. That's when they're triggered, and that's when you'll really be able to see how the parent interacts with their child. It's during these tough moments.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. Thank you for joining me today. I'll just see if there are any other questions. But besides that, I wonder if we could figure out with everybody, since they're here, if you want to come back, or if there's another topic that we can cover on Instagram together, maybe at some point. What other populations do you work with? And I'm just putting it out there to end our conversation. But yeah, what other topics or populations do you work with?
Yeah, so a lot of the kids I see, in one of the posts, Cindy, that you and I covered, I said, what are some subpopulations that are more prone to tantrums? And some of them are like kids with ADHD, for example, because they're just a little bit more impulsive and they got a lot of energy and they find themselves getting into places that, it's just, they do. And then also that impulsivity part makes it really hard to self-regulate because it goes to the emotions as well. It just have a harder time with behavioral and emotional regulation. So I work with a lot of kids with ADHD. I work with a lot of kids with anxiety because we also see tantrums with that. I also do a lot of work with autism and kids who are more developmentally delayed when they're younger. So we see also tantrums with that because their language may be, impaired, and so they have no other ways of communicating what their needs are initially. So those are some of the more populations I tend to work with in a clinical setting.
Got it. Here in Canada, I know that, well, especially the clinicians I've met and worked with here in Montreal, ADHD is often only diagnosed once they start school. But then this past year, the more people I've been talking with through Instagram and in the States, it seems that it's sometimes diagnosed earlier than, let's say, 7 years old. How young is it diagnosed in the States?
Yeah, in the States, you really can start around age 4.
Wow.
And that's what our society, and so we do that, but we don't, but treatments differ when they're that young. So even if they have an early diagnosis of ADHD, we don't start them on the go-to, what we see for older kids with just medication. We don't start them with a dose of medication typically, unless there's significant impairments. A lot of it comes to these kind of strategies we're talking about now. So getting parents in the door and learning how to manage that energy, impulsivity, the hyperactivity or the inattention, and learning really strategies to kind of support the child in building the skills.
Maybe that would be a good follow-up for us, the ADHD part, because I'm thinking at 4 years old, I feel like so many of these kids are impulsive. That's part of what we see. So how do we as a parent, again, gauge to sort of understand this is okay, but this is, does it have to do with functioning, I guess, but this is okay and this is maybe not okay anymore, and I need to speak to somebody regarding those signs of inattention and impulsivity. Where's the line between that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I think clinically, the thing we see is most 4-year-olds, sometimes I get 3s and I get, 5s come in the door. It's because it's really impacting their lives. Like, for example, they're getting suspended from schools, or, they're getting hurt in ways. And so I always say, no matter whether or not it's ADHD, the parents need the same kind of recommendations and treatment as a kid with ADHD. So it doesn't hurt to, a diagnosis is just something, I think medically, it helps us think about how do I support a kid to get a diagnosis, to be able to work through it. And then you can evaluate when they are older, if you want to consider medications, if there is still kind of impairments in life. But all that to say, when they're coming in at that age, it's because it is just a lot. It is, and it's kind of and one more important thing, ADHD runs in families. It has a very high kind of genetic disposition. And so usually with these kids who are, let's say 4, that are coming in, their older siblings who have ADHD, their parents do, their grandparents, we see it within the family tree. And so it is very likely that they're going to end up with an ADHD diagnosis.
Got it. Thank you for that. That's definitely, I think, a good area for follow-up. Thank you for spending time with us tonight on this family meeting.
Yeah, this is fun.
Thank you. Yeah, we meet here every Monday. We just chit chat. And I think that this will be very valuable for parents to at least have an idea of what to do with their child and how to sort of approach all these tantrums. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Next week is, I forget now what the topic is about. Oh yeah, I think mom work-life balance. I'll let you know in the email on the mailing list. And if you have any questions, you could reach me at info@curiousneuron.com and come say hello on Instagram at curious_neuron. Thanks again, Chen.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.